This is Fred McNeil, and you're watching QAC TV Fireside Chat. I have with us Hal Wilson. Hal, I'm welcoming you again.
Thank you again,
for
Fred.
Part 2 of what's been an amazing story. Now, let's just remind the audience, we're in America in the mid-1960s. Okay, we're talking about the civil rights marches in Selma, Alabama, and also later the tragic death of one Unitarian minister who, with two other colleagues, were beaten severely, and one man died. Here you've flown down from Massachusetts to attend basically a memorial service for this young Unitarian minister who died, and you're now telling us you're at the church. You faced this barricade situation for the first time in your life. You felt hate and anger from people in authority, and you never experienced that. Why don't you take it from there?
Well, that's an excellent summary, Fred. Thank you. We're at the barrier, but from the barrier, then we were ushered into the church, and the church actually is a beautiful.
And you described this. This is not a small.
Well, we were. I was in the balcony. Looking down, and it's the pulpit is on a large raised platform, all stained mahogany wood, not mahogany, but stained wood.
Beautiful.
A central pulpit with the choir pews in the back. Just a gorgeous
church.
A gorgeous church.
And you're talking about thousands of people who've come
down
to this
God,
service.
We were crowded in all over the place. And again, this is March 15, 1965 in Brown Chapel. And a lot of speakers, a lot of people spoke. And then Dr. Martin Luther King.
So Martin Luther King actually came to this memorial service.
No.
Okay.
He led the march. He was there, and King. I want to say this. King, in his speech, a brilliant speech, but in his speech, King asked, "Who killed James Reeb?" And he answered basically a few ignorant men, and then he asked, what killed James Reeb? And he answered that question basically by saying an irrelevant church, an indifferent clergy, an irresponsible political system, a corrupt law enforcement hierarchy, a timid federal government, and an uncommitted Negro population.
So King said, besides the men who beat this poor man to death,
they were
all
the
of us. Yeah,
that's exactly right.
It's all of us are guilty in some way.
And in this brilliant speech, his exhortation at that time was for all of us to leave our ivory towers and storm the bastion of segregation. And it's beautiful language. So the white South might come to terms with its conscience.
Okay, and remember, these are amazing words in 1965. The country's in turmoil. TV is sending to American homes and homes around the world dogs being sicked on people, fire hoses, people beaten.
Then we got the word that Frank Johnson had granted a permit
so you were allowed
to march to the Dallas County Courthouse and continue the service or have a service at the Dallas County Courthouse. So now we were going to go back out in the street and face the Forest Service and the possemen and everybody else out there. And so 3,000 of us with Martin Luther King and John Lewis and Hosea Williams.
And this is ministers and people from all over the country.
In the front, in the front of this. We were allowed to march not in the street, but on the sidewalk, 3 abreast. Okay. And that was what we did. And that march was basically without incident. We went, we did our thing. I'd say maybe an 8-10 block march or something like that, maybe a little further. But the significant thing that came out of all of this at that point was that at 9 o'clock that night, President Johnson addressed the Congress and asked for the passage of the 1965 Voter Rights Act.
The momentum had built up so much. The pressure is now reached the politicians. We're tired of seeing this unfairness on TV. People dying and being beaten.
Yeah. But the beautiful part of Johnson's speech, not only was he calling now for the passage, but let me just say that he ended his speech. That Johnson ended his speech by saying, "At times, history and fate meet in a single place to shape a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. So it was at Lexington and Concord. So it was a century ago at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama." And he uttered the words, "We shall overcome."
Pretty amazing speech in front of Congress.
And
maybe a turning point in American history.
And it was a huge turning point, and that bill was passed, and that changed voting rights for minorities across the country. But the interesting thing, Fred, and I think you asked me earlier, what's the takeaway?
Right.
Today.
If we were talking to a bunch of high school students, what would we say? What is the what all these amazing things that happened?
Right.
Political will change, an ethical will change, people losing lives, marches. So yes, what did that give to the young people today?
And the point I would suggest is that we are not through.
Okay. That was one of the steps
we are not even close to being through. We have come an incredibly long way, but just as a reminder of where we are now, back in June of last year, the Supreme Court took out of that Voting Rights Act
that was passed in
65 a key provision that required 15 states, most of them in the South, to receive permission from the federal government for any changes they are going to make to the voting rights laws in their state. That was eliminated, taken out by the Supreme Court.
So all those hard-fought victories we got in 65, it's changed a bit.
Almost immediately, 8 of those 15 states began
to change the law.
Changes in their law, and you know what a lot of the changes were. What happened, and I'll name names here. North Carolina has been one of the quickest and one of the worst. Voter ID laws that are restricted. I mean, my mother-in-law's 105. Where is she going to get a voter ID thing to go vote anywhere? But that can be debated. They've been cutting voting hours and days.
The number of hours you can go to a poll,
They
the
have
number of days you can go to a poll.
They have been moving polling places in black communities. They've been cutting voting hours and days, purging voter rolls, North Carolina, Virginia, particularly, ending same-day voter registrations, and as I said, limiting voting places.
Well, Hal, let me ask you. You've got 15 high school kids sitting here right now. You're in front of a civics class, and they're going to say, Mr. Wilson, your generation made a sacrifice by going to Alabama and the freedom rides, et cetera, et cetera. Martin Luther King led the way, all right, with amazing speeches, amazing leadership. What would you tell these 15 young people? What do they have to do in 2015?
What they have to do in 2015 is, first of all, inform themselves.
Get the facts.
You've got to be engaged with what is happening in this world.
Okay.
And that means you have to get information.
Get the news, get the facts. I mean, internet's a great tool. By golly, know what's going on.
Right.
Okay.
And from there, you have got to raise your voice at every opportunity that there is. You've got to raise your voice and to pick up some words from Martin Luther King. You've got to raise your voice for justice. And you've got to understand what is just. And you know, we can argue about voter ID laws, but if in fact voter ID laws restrict voter participation,
That's not fair.
where there has basically been 0 or 0.1% fraud, then you have got to raise your voice about that.
So your advice to the young ones is stay informed, get involved, and by golly, speak out for what's right.
Absolutely.
Well, Hal, let me ask you this. Are we ready to march again? I know again have called upon two old guys.
Well, after Selma, I did march with Martin Luther King. I marched, in fact, in Dorchester, Massachusetts with him, and I marched in a couple of other
Sounds
places.
like me,
in
you
New
haven't
England.
stopped marching.
No, you
Okay.
can't quit marching,
Okay.
right?
Well, Hal, look, let me thank you very much, okay? This is Fred McNeil. You've been watching Fireside Chat. And a reminder to everybody, Hal has parts 1 and 2 where he talks about his experiences in the civil rights movement in the mid-1960s in the United States, a movement that changed the country, changed the world. And Hal's advice to young people everywhere is get the facts, stay involved, and speak out for right. Sound good?
Vote.
And vote. Okay. Hal, again, thank you very much. I'm Fred McNeil. You've been watching Fireside Chat. My time's up, and thank you for your time.